Hello, hello, hello. We are back for another episode of the Jane Wareham podcast, and I have an amazing pleasure coach, Brooke Leavitt. And today we are going to talk about something that I've never really heard about this before, and it is low dopamine lifestyle. So we are going to unpack this today. It's going to be absolutely amazing. Brooke, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's funny because I still get excited every time someone's like pleasure coach. It always sends like a little tingle down my spine. So, yay. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think it definitely brings people in. They're like, pleasure coach. Ooh, what could this be about? So this is gonna be really cool because, like I said, when we first met, I had not really heard the term like low dopamine lifestyle, how this, impacts our ability to have meaningful pleasure, to reach our goals, to have long-lasting results, how this ties into life. So, Breck, let's start. My listeners are new to you.
Mhm.
So let's share a little bit about you. How did you even get on this path towards becoming a pleasure coach?
Yes. So it really, like all good things in life, it just stumbled across my path, but it wasn't packaged as a low dopamine lifestyle. So it's a combination of a lot of things I had already been doing, but I didn't really understand how it worked as a system. And so when I tried to do one piece at a time, like say not drink for 30 days, or reduce my exposure to social media, really any media source for 30 days, that would create some kind of result. Or when I would stop eating sugar for a time period, or when I would think about neuroscience, like it didn't all piece together to me because it wasn't packaged as such. So this is something that how I label it, because it makes sense in my brain. And I think it makes sense for people like this as well. And yeah, I used to play this game every month called the Feel Good Game. And it's a little bit similar to this, but basically trying to bring in really meaningful pleasure into our lives while avoiding kind of these naughty or bad guys. And it looks different for everybody. And so this really started to come about for me when I decided to quit drinking. And this was over a year ago. And I had been battling with trying to get off booze for years before that. And I didn't really have a problem, but, I use it as a stress reduction tool. And, reliably.
Yeah.
Open a bottle of wine while I made dinner, sort of thing, like just very, very, very consistently. And I would have success for short periods of time, but I couldn't really link them together because I didn't understand a lot of things. But I definitely didn't understand the role of dopamine in my sobriety journey. And so this all made a lot more sense after I had maybe like 6 or 7 months of systems approach thinking under my belt. And we can talk all about that. But essentially, it fell on my lap. And I was very delighted to kind of see it one day. We've all had these aha moments, right? Where you've been looking at the same problem for years. And then all of a sudden, you're like, wait a second. Oh, fuck. It was all this the whole time. And I just couldn't see it. So that's really what this was for me.
Okay, this is so interesting. And I think listeners are gonna be so intrigued as we dive deeper into this. But I can definitely relate to that with a lot of clients I used to work with in the health and wellness space. And it's like continuously yo-yo dieting, continuously being on these fitness programs and not actually like exactly having that aha moment when you do realize it's something deeper, it's something from within that's holding you back from getting those results. So let's go even further. So explain to me, explain to our listeners here, what exactly is a low dopamine lifestyle in your perspective?
Yeah. Well, I will explain it to you like I would explain it to my grandmother, because sometimes this helps the best. So not to patronize anybody or to dumb it down, but I think it's really, really helpful. So dopamine, I think people have heard of. It's a neurotransmitter, which basically just means it helps our neurons, which are the cells in our brain, communicate with one another and create different results based on the different neurotransmitters that are released. Um, for grandma, it helps our brain work. Yeah.
Oh no, we
um,
need that. We need that. It's not even about dumbing us down. Like we got to simplify these things for us all so that we got a lot going on, you know? This is
yeah.
good. This is
Yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah.
Simplifying it for me. I'm happy.
So it helps our brain communicate with other parts of our brain. And dopamine, you probably have heard of as like the feel-good hormone. And so when you think of feel good, you think of pleasure. And for me, that was confusing for a while because dopamine actually isn't 100% correlated with pleasure. It's correlated with desire. And that is a piece of the pleasure puzzle. But if you think of desire as the wanting of pleasure, the foreplay of pleasure, if you can imagine it that way, right? This lead up period. I like to invite people to think about, when you book a vacation, it usually isn't for the next day, right? It's a week away, it's a month away, it's a few months away. But that lead up period, like whenever you're having a shitty day and your boss is being an absolute asshat, like you can be like, okay, I'm going to be on the beach in so many days, it's coming. Like that lead up period is very, very, very important. In short, dopamine leads us to go seek out pleasure and avoid pain. And the low dopamine lifestyle is really about limiting our exposure to synthetic dopamine, which would come from, I'll just use like the obvious example, like drugs or booze or smoking or things of that nature. And then actively seeking the behaviors and substances that elicit dopamine in like the right amount. So I'll just give like the most extreme example. So meth creates a 1,200 increase percent over the baseline level of dopamine. That is
No wonder people get hooked to that.
correct. It's massive. Whereas an orgasm is 100. Just think about that. Like, and we all love orgasms. Yeah. So like it is massive. And so if you're, and most of us aren't doing meth on a daily basis, but if you're playing with substances that increase your dopamine that much higher than like an orgasm would, we're floating around in this kind of scary space because then things that are really actually pleasurable to us that we actually desire, like a meaningful conversation with a friend, going for a walk with our spouse, having uninterrupted time with our children, actually doesn't seem that interesting to us because if you compare the peak exposure, it doesn't math, right? So low dopamine lifestyle is really about picking the areas where we're receiving our dopamine from intentionally so we can actually feel like meaningful amounts of pleasure compared to non-meaningful, which would be like every time your phone pings, right? Like usually when we look at it, we're not expecting something like awesome. We're not expecting someone to like shower us with love every second. We have to look at it, right? That's not super meaningful in the long scheme, right? But you're not going to remember that on your deathbed, but you absolutely would remember like that, heart to heart you had with your spouse over a really hard topic that you didn't want to have, that you did, right? Like those are really meaningful things. And so that is not the most simple explanation I could possibly come up with, but in a nutshell, we are avoiding things that create huge spikes. So meth is obviously the biggest one, but even a glass of wine can dump a ton of dopamine into our brain. And if you think you have maybe one glass, or maybe it's two, or maybe it's three, or maybe over a series of a night out on a town, you have a martini and then you go out for drinks and it stacks. And so we're just being really intentional aware of what we're putting into our bodies, both substance wise and activity wise. Like, if you're jumping out of planes every other day, it's going to be hard to enjoy painting or something of that nature. And then we just go like kind of hog wild on some of the other activities, which I would call low dopamine inducing behaviors. And those are usually the things that people at the end of the day want to say they like, but maybe don't because in their brain, it doesn't compute. It's not as exciting as those huge highs.
So really, and I like to even think about my life and how, anyone watching the video, I'm making like a wave with my hand and how I try to neutralize how I feel generally every single day. And of course, you're going to have highs and lows, but trying to manage using my mind and my mindset to manage the extreme highs and extreme lows. It seems like kind of similar with this.
Yes, exactly. And so with a lot of what I would call synthetic, right? So like man-made or what we're really like, and people will argue with that some of these drugs are plant medicine, fine. I think everyone knows what we're talking about. These aren't just something we can like stumble upon. Not only do they create these high highs, but they usually have a really strong negative response as well, versus what we've already talked about, which is an orgasm will take you up, but then it comes back to baseline. It actually doesn't go down. And so like that's what we're really looking for. Things that give us peaks without bringing us down afterward. And a lot of us haven't cultivated that practice in our lives. And so especially as adults, when we've been told this is what's fun for adults, and we get a little confused because we haven't really, you know, practiced with the pleasure muscle in areas outside of, for most adults, a few things.
Okay. And I know that obviously there's multiple different things that raise dopamine, but as you were saying with drinking, I'm a social drinker for sure. Like I'm not one to crack open a bottle of wine by myself, but I feel the booze blues like the next day. Like if I have a few drinks, it's like I can feel a lack of motivation. This isn't even drinking a lot. Like I don't even need to drink a lot anymore. And I feel that. So I can see how you get the high and then it just drops. And that's just not great. And so I'd love to know how, in your opinion, so how is living this type of, encouraging and creating this low dopamine lifestyle, how would that help improve like goal seeking and goal setting and goal attainment? How can that help? Because obviously, I would imagine it creates some form of clarity.
Yeah, well, certainly creates a lot more clarity, but also like our lives are just better. It's kind of the best way of putting it, right? So if you're generally feeling better about how you're behaving, if you're generally feeling better about how you're making decisions, it's a lot easier to actually make forward progress towards our goals because we're not getting these huge rebounds, right? So we're actually able to make slower, incremental progress toward the goals that we actually desire, which is part of the process, right? Sometimes we get confused. Our brain is, it's being adaptive in a way about seeking pleasure. But if we're saying this long-term goal is actually more important to me than a short-term high, this isn't like groundbreaking stuff, but it's actually very reliable. And that's what I really like about this most. It doesn't require deprivation. And I'm going to say that carefully because I want to be clear that this does involve abstinence from some substances, very importantly, but that is not necessarily deprivation. Deprivation in my mind would be, I want the thing and I cannot have it. I don't want to drink anymore. I'm not yearning for it. And so I'm not giving up anything, but that
It's like a
didn't exist in
conscious
it.
choice.
Yeah, but my brain had to catch up with it, right? So like
Yeah.
when I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop drinking, like like I said, I had done many 30 days sprints, 75 days. I had done a couple 4 months at a time, but I was still thinking to myself, gosh, it's really better when I drink. It's more fun. So until I really let go of that, and I don't mean let go of like in a poof, it's gone. Like it's just easy that like
Mhm.
I'm just saying that flippantly. Like this required effort. But my brain had to catch up with my mind, if that makes sense. Like I could consciously
Mhm.
be like, I don't want this in my life. But my brain was still highly adapted to go seek it out because I had trained it over decades to go seek it out, right? Been drinking since college. So it helps in goal seeking because it really narrows our focus. And that goal actually seems pleasurable now because it's in the right framework and the right level, right? Like you were talking about this wave with your hand, right? So if we're
Mhm.
not doing these massive up and downs, that goal doesn't seem so crazy, so difficult to reach when we're not having to constantly come up from where we dropped off the last time.
Can you give an example about some of like something that's happened for you in your life to kind of
Yeah.
give more of an example to this so people that are listening can really start to see how maybe before, of course, as yourself, an entrepreneur, a coach, it's like as having also corporate work, you had goals along the way. So how has this now changed since you've adopted this lifestyle, since you've stopped, drinking and being more conscious and aware of the things that were spiking your dopamine? Can you give an example of the
Yeah.
shift kind of?
Yeah. So I think I liked what you said earlier about this clarity. And I think it's that can mean lots of things, but let's just take one story, for example. So I used to work 80 hours a week as a management consultant for a global consulting firm. And I pretty much hated it the entire time that I was in it. There were lots of great things that I learned, but I pretty much knew from day one that this wasn't something that I could realistically sustain over a very long period of time. Like my work ethic and my determination and my drive would make sure I got it done, but I was really paying the price. Like it was really taking a toll on me. So one of my goals was always to figure out how to get out of this career while coming up with a solution that didn't really harm my family financially or harm me, because I had really been attached to my career and like my title. Like I was a principal at the consulting firm when I had left. And once I really dove into the low dopamine lifestyle, and I had lived it for well over a year at this point, and it doesn't take everybody that long, but that's what it was for me. So I'm just going to share that like just transparently, because I don't want to mislead anyone. Like, you do this for a month and there you go.
Yeah.
It's not like that. Like this is I'm very clear about that. This is a lifestyle, and I call it that because it's something that I would hope people would take on if it works for them for their lifetime. This isn't something that you just do and then stop doing. I was scared shitless to leave that job. Like I could talk about it till I was blue in the face, and it didn't ever compute in my mind. It was always too much that I was losing. And then somehow, and this is the stuff that's behind the scenes, right? That I can't put all the puzzle pieces together for people, but something shifted in me when I had this clarity about like, I am having to self-medicate either through alcohol or through taking long baths or by like sequestering myself on the weekends and having absolutely no exposure to other humans because I was so exhausted. It was taking that much effort just for me to like be okay. Like not good, not great, not excellent. Like I might have been scoring well, but it cost me so much. But when I was self-medicating through these behaviors, I couldn't see it, right? Because I was always kind of like in this ebb and flow of trying to get back to okay. And when I actually had to work through these feelings, it became just so obvious to me that I was like intentionally harming myself through this profession. So the key outcome of this story is that I finally had the courage to leave. Importantly, before I had some like $1 million business to jump to. So this was a true like meaningful aha moment that I had to act on before I had like this like cushy place to jump to. And most people, that's really, 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 really scary, especially when their brain is flooded with all kinds of conflicting information. And so this lifestyle really helped me get clear on like, that's not something I can do for 10 more years, for example.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, that really resonates with me. Like, not too different from myself working in project management for a long time, burning the midnight oil. And then also, like you, I mean, I would like live for the weekend. Like, I could not wait for Friday for like the beer cart in the agency to come around, have a glass of wine. You know what I mean? To go out to just like release. And also, too, I lived for my vacations. Like I took 3 vacations a year but came back to the same shit, came back to the same stress. And it's can be challenging to really look within and see how misaligned the things that you're doing because you're not feeling happy. And so I just love this whole like approach of seeking pleasure and accepting it and going for it. But good pleasure that's going to really make you feel good. And it's, science based and just the way that the mind works. We act based on how we feel. And so if you're doing things that make you feel good, of course your life's going to feel like fucking better. There's no other way. Like, and so that's just like, yeah, this is so cool and so interesting. So, we're starting to see here how like the effects that this can have. So, in your opinion, how does this really like if someone's going to think about adopting this type of lifestyle or start making some shifts, really awareness is the first thing. So, becoming aware that maybe, that this is something that they should start looking into. How, in your opinion, does this really create these like lasting results? Like, to avoid, like I mentioned earlier, about people yo-yoing, yo-yo dieting, yo-yo this, yo-yoing in life. How does this really help create these lasting results?
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of address two parts of that. So I think what you mentioned in the beginning was like, how would you kind of know? And like awareness being the first key, which is so fascinating to me. This works even if you don't know what's going on. And so the awareness, like it would be ideal if someone was like, maybe this is something that I should to try out. And that's why I offer this as a game for people to get started, because it's really just interesting to me, and I think for most people to be like, what is going on with all my dopamine levels? Like, what is it that is so hard for me to avoid? Or what is it the thing that I'm constantly craving? Like for me, it's sugar. Haven't kicked that one yet. And so it's really fun to just kind of like examine it without having to be like, oh, I should, or I ought to, or I need to. It's more of like, what the fuck is happening in my brain that I have no conscious awareness of? That's the one thing. Okay, so
I
to
love
basically
that.
avoid this yo-yo button, um, it the biggest thing here with the long lasting change is that it's not hard. And I think when people get these yo-yo results is when they're doing something that's like too hard for too long, right? Like our brain, like I mentioned,
Hmm.
is constantly seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And in our modern culture, I think we're inundated with a lot of pain most of the day if you're in the wrong career. And if not, like it's chores, it's responsibilities. And I'm not saying that those are like inherently painful, but I think a lot of people are going through their daily life doing things that either they don't want to do, or they could use a little bit more help on, or they don't really get, but they're doing it because they've been shoulded into it. And this lifestyle doesn't look like that because it's not that painful, right? So what I
Hmm.
haven't mentioned yet is that there are some companion pieces to this puzzle, right? So there's some underlying work we would need to do with some of these limiting beliefs, and this is stuff that you work on, precisely with your clients, right? These limiting beliefs that are
Hmm.
keeping people from actually being able to like get over that hurdle. So we would do stuff like that. And then what I haven't even mentioned yet is like there's a whole world of pleasure that most people have no idea even exists because they haven't allowed themselves to even look at it. And you
Give
know,
us a taste.
yeah, I think
You're
this is so
teasing
nerdy.
it.
I fear to give a couple examples, but I'll let my vulnerability hangover happen later because these are things that like are pleasurable to me, but like other people would be like, the fuck, like, and that's the whole point of pleasure. Is it is supposed to be individual. It's supposed to maybe look weird to other people, but feel good to you. And so I think we talked about when we were discussing me coming on this podcast, like how queen bees are are formed and how I had no interest in bees. I just like, stumbled upon my path and I was so like crazy curious about how this happens. And I'm a science person and I love the animal kingdom. And so it really made sense to me to go follow this curiosity to whatever end. And it ended with me having no interest in becoming a beekeeper. Like that's where the curiosity completely ended, right? Like that was not interesting to me. But for somebody else, it could be like they have never really considered making their own cabinets and like they now want to become a cabinet maker. Like we have no idea what will actually be interesting to somebody because culturally we're told, you can like sports if you're a dude. If you're a girl, you're supposed to really like things that make you look prettier. So you can like sports, but only if it like makes your ass look great. I mean, it's crazy, right? And so
Mhm.
we really get rid of that cultural bullshit and we allow ourselves to be like, no, what is interesting to me? Oh, I love to do things that are under the sea. Oh, I love to like plant things, but like only cacti. I don't know what it is. Like it's
Mhm.
specific to every single person. And it sounds like those examples probably sound lame to the majority of people that are listening. And that's the point. It's fine. It doesn't have to be applicable to most people. It just has to work for you. And that's
I
awesome.
love that.
And so we get to figure that out together. Um, and I don't give a fuck if your neighbor likes it, if your parents like it, if you're not hurting anybody, who cares? That's the whole point. Um, and that stuff we get to discover along the way. And we'll actually have the capacity and the interest to go follow those things because we're not going to be spending all of our time and energy on stuff that's actually not that meaningful to us.
Oh, I absolutely love this. And that's what I used to do with my previous clients in the wellness space, like a few years ago, is when it came to their health and wellness, like what brings them joy. And it doesn't matter what your mom does or your sister does or your neighbor does, who cares? If you want to dance in your kitchen and that's like the movement that you get, that's cool. you know? And I love that. And I think too, it's similar to what I coach like people on now around like their happiness and creating like a happy and joyous life. That is only in your eyes. It's what brings you joy. It's where you find happiness, and your business is going to look very different from someone else's. Mine will look very different from yours based off the values that I have. And, actually taking the steps and doing the things that I love to do, which is a huge part of it. So you touched on, I think, our kind of last thing to touch on here and to talk about would be, okay, so getting started with this. I mean, you mentioned some games that you do. Share, I love to give our audience something to kind of chew on, take away, take action on. So, how would someone's like, okay, this is cool. You just said I don't even need to be aware. So amazing. I just need to kind of start doing something. So, how could someone get started? What would you recommend, or what do you have to offer?
Yeah. So I think to get started, I would really, a couple ways that I would consider doing this, but for the most part, I think people have no fucking clue how much dopamine they are getting dumped into their brain on a daily basis, and they don't know where it's coming from. So I would recommend starting with my dopamine detox, and it's a 30-day game. And I say that in game very specifically because we're working every day to earn points, and then you lose points by doing certain other behaviors. So it's actually really, really fun to be able to like gamify something that's kind of serious. And at the end of the day, you report in your score to a group that's playing this game as well. And by the end of those 30 days, I'm going to have I have really, really good confidence that people will kind of understand like where their problem spots are. And again, this is something that most people actually aren't aware of because they don't look at it and they're too busy kind of like just getting through every single day. So I would play the dopamine game with me if I could offer that. It's $27 for 30 days. It's less than $1 a day. It's super, super, super accessible. If people want to do something that costs absolutely no dollars, they can go to my website and you can do a dopamine pulse check. And that happens over a 7-day period. It's all on your own, but I give you all the instructions for figuring out like, where is it that I have like massive cravings? Where is it that I indulge on a regular basis? And then you'll get to kind of see like where your problem spots are, but it's still kind of a guess because we're not really doing active tracking. That would do the pulse check or play the game. And then, most importantly, like I think, when I sit down at a dinner table with my friends and we're just like being honest and just kind of in our best version of ourselves together, I would ask yourself if you could, and from that kind of mindset of like, where is it that you're getting pleasure from? And if you don't have a long list, if you can't name more than 4 things, this is probably something we want to look at. And then very importantly, if your list all is dependent on money or other people, that's something really to consider. And my voice is getting serious because it's a really serious thing because we have to have things that are sustainable for ourselves that we can reliably get. And that's the ordeal. I think for a lot of people, we have strategies, but they're expensive or they're very far and few between, like your vacations, right? Like however many you could go on a year. Did that really fill your cup enough to get you to the next one? Probably not, especially when we bring other people along and have expectations and they cost stuff and then we're drinking and we're blah, 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 blah. It's hard. So I would play the game. There's also some really, really books that I could recommend as well. So people can reach out to me directly if they are looking for very specific resources on how to get started at brookelevitt.com.
Amazing. And we're going to have all of your links and everything in the show notes. We can definitely link to as well any of these challenges, and we'll have your Instagram handle on your website because I know you're active on there. So this has been so good and so interesting. You've got me thinking, I mean, I feel that I probably already have a relatively low dopamine lifestyle, and I am always doing things that bring me joy every single day that cost absolutely nothing, like getting outside in nature and keeping myself in check. But I'm going to definitely check it out and, participate in one of these challenges so that I can really see how I can kind of take that to the next level. So Brooke, thank you so much for being here. This has been absolutely amazing.
Thank you for having me. Cheers, y'all.